Okay, this video is going to be pretty short, but I think you're going to like this. One of the things we do a lot on this channel is we go through old newspapers and find articles primarily about rock bands, heavy metal, hard rock kind of stuff. But I kind of accidentally stumbled across this tiny little article that I think you're going to just really get a kick out of this. This is really cool. So in this newspaper, that's the Statesville Record and Landmark. They have this page, or had this page on here that was, it looked like it was focused on things for kids to send in. It's like a kids page, and you can see there, if you're watching this and not just listening to it, you'll see what appears to be a drawing of George Washington done by what does it say? Grade 5 is what it says on the screen. So what is this, a 9-year-old, 10-year-old, something like that? So anyway, I found this on accident because a few weeks ago we did a video where the article was kind of describing heavy metal. And so what I did is I started doing some searches on other things where people had described what heavy metal is in newspapers, and I just accidentally ran into this little thing. So I'm going to read this to you. And what this is some kid named Ginny Genfin who wrote this just 2 paragraphs on what music is going to be like, believe it or not, in 2025. And so this was written again in 1988. And I just think you'll enjoy listening to what she had to say. Again, this is a 6th grader. This is a 6th grade kid talking about what music's going to be like in 2025. And it's just kind of fun listening to this. So the title of her little article is Music in 2025. And here it goes. If you would like to know what music will probably sound like in 2025, then just think about how much music has changed in the past 80 years. Well, for instance, what we call heavy metal, headbanging music, will probably be called soft rock in 2025, and who knows what the heavy metal will sound like. Now, that's so interesting because although we don't necessarily call heavy metal soft rock today, it is interesting to see the shift that took place because so many of the things that we knew as heavy metal back in the 80s today is classic rock. And I guess it's a pattern anybody could have understood of just hearing this come from a 6th grader at the time. Because you walk into a grocery store today, and what do you hear over the loudspeakers? You hear Guns N' Roses. Yeah, I mean, what would have been, what kind of took the place of soft rock now is what we knew as heavy metal back in the 80s, which is just kind of just an interesting thing to now, in retrospect, to be standing here, me as a guy in my 50s looking, yeah, that's actually what happened. We had this stuff that was feared by the parents, in the older generation back in the 80s. And today it's just kind of normal, soft rock in the sense that it's the stuff you hear in a grocery store. Okay, so now, then this goes on, and this is pretty interesting. And she goes on and says, heavy metal will sound like, it'll probably be really loud and have very, very strange lyrics. And when you look at the trajectory of what heavy music has become, she's not really far off from where it ended up going. And then she goes, who knows? There might not even be any country music around. Now, I mean, obviously, country music's just become more and more and more popular over the years. So that, but it's not. But it's adjusted. It's not what we knew as country music back then, and this is kind of interesting too, because what we understood as country music going back into the 80s and before that, the 80s you were starting to see it change, but you go back into the 70s and 60s and you start looking at people like George Jones, and some of the people that were the Roy Clark, and that kind of country music is really kind of, well, if it exists, it just isn't what it was today. So interestingly, the country music that we knew back in the era that she would have understood has really, in some ways, and I'm not a country music follower, so I'm speaking out of turn a little bit, but I do follow it enough that I don't see that style prominently anymore. It's been replaced by something very, very highly produced and a lot different than it was back in the 60s, 70s kind of country music. It's adjusted. So it's interesting to hear that. There might not even be any country music around. Well, that's not true. But it's just that it's definitely really not the country music that they would have known back at this time and prior to that. It's made a major change. Okay, now, and rap music might be more popular. That's fascinating because rap music might be more popular. Yeah, it might actually take over everything. I mean, it's enormous. It's interestingly kind of become in some ways a part of everything. We see it everywhere, and it's become a part of. There's elements. I mean, even looking back when Linkin Park hit, which would have been kind of a new millennium version of heavy metal in a way, because they hit what in 99, 2000-ish. They were taking heavy metal in a way and incorporating all of the new technology and rap into it. So it's interesting, and rap music might be more popular. Rap music was in its infancy back then, and it's just kind of infiltrated again into almost everything in a way. And then she writes, I can't predict the future, so we'll just have to wait and see. And that's Ginny Genthan, and she's at Celeste Henkel School, or maybe that's the name of her teacher, I don't know, grade 6. Anyway, I thought, just because on accident this was specifically about 2025, and because we're just weeks away from entering into 2025, I thought it was so interesting to hear what a 6th grader was thinking at the time about what music, and because we spend so much time talking about hard rock and heavy metal on this channel, to hear this kid kind of address that, and in a weird way so accurately predict. But what's more important about the way she predicted it was the way she did it. It wasn't just that it was this random thought, well, this. It's saying, look, we can kind of see where all this is going just by looking into the past. If you look at what's happened over the last 80 years, you can kind of predict where all this is going to go. And she wasn't wrong. That we see so many of these changes take place if you just look at the way things had changed prior to that. And one of the things that puts this really into perspective for me, because when we started listening, for example, I'll just say Mötley Crüe, because what was it, 81, 82, when I heard Too Fast for Love, that album, and the song Live Wire, which just, I remember where I was when I heard it. It was so amazing, and it was just this whole brand new thing. Well, think about that. If that was 1981, 82, when I first heard that thing, 20 years earlier, the Beatles hadn't even showed up on the scene yet. We were still just in the infancy of rock and roll, and like doo-wop was popular back at that time. And so in just those short 20 years, look what happened. And so now here we are in 2024, almost 2025, and that same amount of time, you'd be going back to 2004. And what was popular then? I mean, it's just interesting to think that our perspective today in 2024 to 2004 is the same amount of time it was from 1982 to 1962. And everything. Jimi Hendrix hadn't showed up. The British invasion hadn't started. Any of that stuff, and there we were listening to Mötley Crüe. That's the same amount of time. Anyway, it kind of blows my mind thinking about this. That same amount of time, the dramatic changes that took place in that period, and so we're looking at that same thing now. That in 2024, that same amount of time went by from 2004. Anyway, I know so many people that watch this channel are my age, give or take 15 years, and and it's probably something that you think about too when you look at these. You have this perspective, and that's also what kind of I thought was fascinating about this, is because is she just saying, look, if you want to know what's going to happen, just kind of look at what's happened in the past. Look at all the things that have changed in the last 80 years. And my perspective, as she says that, is, I mean, just look back at the last 20 years from 1988 going backward, and 20 years after her would have been 2008. 20 years after she said this, and so here we are again in 2025, and just it's fascinating. I thought you'd find that interesting. Thought I'd share that with you, and I'd love to hear your comments because so many people again are close to my age that watch this channel, that follow this. Have you had these similar thoughts about these massive passages of time and how things have changed so dramatically? And what are your thoughts on that? And what do you do with those thoughts? Because it's so fascinating to look back on this and look at these dramatic changes and how we've actually lived through several of those things in our own lifetime. Hey, anyway, please follow this channel. Like the video, share your thoughts, and of course, as always with that, have yourself a fantastic day.